So natural resources management is really just about managing land and water, soil, plants and animals, really any natural resource towards some outcome or goal that we've defined. And part of natural resources management, what's implicit in that field, is the idea that we're going to be managing those resources sustainably so that they're available for future generations as well as current ones. Natural resources management is also an interdisciplinary field. And so if we think about it, managing natural resources is more about managing people and the way they're interacting with the environment. And so because of that, it's important that natural and social scientists are both in that field working together. Now is an exciting time to work in natural resources management, and the field is facing a lot of big challenges. And probably one of the greatest ones is that we are trying to really find creative solutions where we can both manage the natural resources, protect the environment, conserve resources, while at the same time supporting communities and making sure that they have the resources they need to survive. So an example would be trying to find ways where we can marry conservation with reducing poverty in an area. And so the reality is, if we look around the world, there are billions of people that are depending on natural resources for their livelihood. Another reality is that if we look at the hotspots of biodiversity on this planet, they're usually occurring in places that have huge challenges, that are struggling with poverty. And so what this means is that we need to find solutions that are meeting both the ecological needs that we have in terms of using resources or maintaining them into the future, but also meeting the needs of the people and the communities that are living there. Another big challenge we have in natural resources is managing resources in the context of climate change. So we know that the changes we're seeing in the climate and to the environment are going to have profound consequences for natural resources in terms of food production and water security and biodiversity conservation. We also know that there are going to be tremendous consequences for human populations as well. It's predicted that about 25 million people are going to be environmental refugees over the next couple of decades. So again, it's imperative that we find solutions and ways to hopefully avoid some of the negative consequences of climate change, to avoid some of the drastic changes that might happen, but at the very least to find ways where we can adapt to the changes that are occurring, so anticipate and respond effectively. So that's a huge focus right now in natural resources management. Another focus area within the field is on environmental justice. This was actually one of the priorities of a recent U.S. Environmental Protection Agency administrator. So environmental justice is really referring to this pattern that we see where the poor and the underrepresented populations are bearing the brunt of environmental degradation. They're carrying the heaviest weight in terms of environmental decline. And so we need to find ways, as we're managing natural resources, to make sure not only that poor or underserved communities are protected, but also that they have a better and stronger voice in the decision-making process. And one of the most, I think, transformative approaches that we've seen over the last couple of decades in natural resource management is the engagement of citizens. And there are two really important ways where citizens are part of the process now. One is that they're part of the decision-making process often. So you have much more community-based decision-making or participatory decision-making, that we're really hearing more what people are needing from the environment or from their communities, and that's being considered. That's really important too within the context of environmental justice, right? Making sure that all voices are heard as part of the decision-making process. Another really important way that citizens are being engaged is actually being part of the scientific process. Citizens are more and more out there collecting the data that agencies and organizations are using to make their decisions. And that's probably not going to change. As funding declines within natural resources and environmental fields, volunteers are called upon more and more to actually be contributing data that we're using to monitor our progress or to identify what the problems are out there. So citizens, I think, have never played a more important role in natural resources management. So environmental education and environmental organizations play really important roles in natural resource management. I mean, ultimately it's a collaboration with educators and managers and scientists. So if we think about, just go back to the beginnings, of what natural resource management is, we said that it's fundamentally about managing people and the way they're interacting with the environment, right? Another key piece that we talked about in natural resources management is that we're managing towards a particular goal or outcome that we as a society have identified as being what we want to achieve. And so educators, where they really become essential is in helping people to develop the understanding and the experiences that will help them really identify and articulate or even just recognize those goals. And we said we want natural resources management, we want it to be sustainable, to protect resources over the long term. But that's something that people need to value, and people need to also understand the different ways that we can achieve that. So that's where I think environmental educators are hugely important and really part of the natural resource management field.